what we'll do, we'll follow a similar order. Because we have things that are overlapping, I'm going to need to color each individual piece separately. And the easiest way to do that would be to start with the torso, and then move kind of down accordingly. Now, as far as the colors to use on this particular one, I have no idea what kind of palette I want to use for this thing. Another challenge I've run into after doing so many of these different mecha designs is there are a lot of different color combinations, and coming up with a completely unique color combination every time is becoming more and more difficult. Let's see, we could go orange. I have to look at my finished folder here and see if I've done any. Let's see, orange. I was thinking orange and dark gray, kind of Halloweenish colors since Halloween was recently. But I've kind of done that already. So what we can do is try and pair something with orange and see what we come up with. First, we'll go through and fill the color out just like we would for any regular pixel design. We could do base, orange, and we could do green highlights. Am I done orange and green yet? We do orange and pale green, kind of like camo colors. And then for the central inner material and the joint colors, could do, let's see, could do tan, like a dark tan. It's more of an earth tones type design. Let's see. I know one of the ones I posted recently is kind of a mix of earth tone shades. But that one's more light. This might not be a bad start for color. What I can do as we move through the different phases here, if I don't like the way the whole piece is looking once it's been colored, I can go into, and this is what I've done before, I can go into the adjustments section and play around with things like the hue and saturation, and I can change the color levels a little bit until I get something that I like. But for now, we'll go ahead and go with this. This is more of an earth tone shade, which is fine. For the head, I'm going to need to hide the upper body as I'm doing this. For the head, we could do a mix of the orange and green on the head as well. And then we'll come up with an appropriate color for the eye. Now that works. If we did dark yellow for the eye. And then we can color the left arm. And also clean up any sections that need to be cleaned up. If we do the left arm here, then we don't have to worry about hiding and unhiding the torso, the upper body. Left arm, we'll go with orange on the shoulder. The sections here would be the joints connecting the shoulder to the upper arm. And here's the forearm. And we can color the textured parts here. And then for the hands, we'll use the same color as the joints for the fingers. And for the blades on the arm and the sort of crystal things set into the shoulder, we could do more of a magenta. Let's see how that looks. It's a little bit too glaring, I think. More pale gray or purple, I think works better. And if we go back to the upper body, we can sample the joint color, inner body. And then color the arm, then the fingers. And that'll do for arm. Now we can move on to the lower body, and we can hide the upper body since we know that it's going to overlap, and we can use all of the colors that are on the arm without having to unhide anything. For the joints on the lower body, it's just the hip sections. The main body, parts of the lower torso, the orange to match, and then this central colored part will be green to match the green sections there. And now we can re-enable the upper body. And one thing I was looking to see is how this section here clips. And I thought that was going to be a problem. What we can do is we can redraw it here, and then that fixes the problem. It does overlap a little bit in this section, but I don't think that's really a big deal. Now we can do the legs. And after we assign the color to the legs, we should be done with the color assignment. Then we can move on to shading, which is probably my favorite part of doing these. Alright, for the left leg, we'll start with orange for the upper section. We can do green for the lower section. We'll go back to orange for up here. I should be doing these in order when I have the color selected, but that's okay. For the joints and the toe part of the blade, we'll keep that same tan. Then for the crystals, we'll use the same purple that we used up here. And that should do it for left leg. Now we do the same thing on the right side, and the color assignment will be finished. I'm gonna have to fix that. I'm gonna have to add in a dividing line up here to match. That should be fine. And go in and fill the green down. Then the joint colors. And the right leg is done. Now if we put everything back into place and zoom out briefly here, this is what the color assignment looks like. And I do think the mix of earth tones and muted greens works for this particular one. I don't think we'll need to really mess around with the hues. So now we can go into shading. And for shading, I don't need to mess around with any of the layers. I can keep them the way they are. There we go, that clips a little bit. It takes a little bit of clipping out from the line work. But now we basically go in section by section and add the shades and highlights. Which, this is pretty repetitive and not terribly exciting part of the process. But I do want to make sure I'm getting my shades right here. What we'll do is we'll make sure and get the back portions, the head, and then the lower portions of the head. Now the eye. Should do it for the head. We can go ahead and collapse the folder for the head since now the head's done. Likewise, we'll move on to the torso, the core. Start with the same order of colors. I try and be consistent with how I go and do the color shading, just like I am for the color assignment. If I do all the orange parts first, then I do all the green parts, and then I do the brown parts consistently, then overall it should make sure I don't miss anything. Let's see, get a little bit around the head. I guess one way to tackle, since this part is pretty much just me sitting here assigning colors and isn't going to necessarily be a whole lot to talk about from a design perspective, for the podcasty part of the video, which I do like including as far as kind of a different type of content for some of these videos. Being able to talk about things, since I don't do normal podcasts, is welcome. I guess what I could talk about while we're doing the shading here and finishing up would be games that I've played that would have directly influenced a lot of the mecha designs. I touched on it a bit towards the beginning, but to maybe go into a little more detail, kind of going back through the memory archives of games I've played where there's been noteworthy design things or other parts of the media that maybe influenced a series like this one. I think that'd be an interesting discussion. In previous videos, I think in some of the commentary videos, I can't remember how many times I've mentioned it, but one of my favorite video game series that goes way back to the 2000s or earlier would be the Armored Core series, developed by notable Souls Factory FromSoft. The first FromSoft game I ever played was the very first Armored Core on PlayStation, way back at the beginning of the 2000s. The Armored Core series, if you've never heard of it, is a mecha building and customizing game built around a campaign system where you're a pilot. I think in all the games they're called Ravens, and you get tasked with outfitting a mech called a core, and you take on missions for factions, and you go and earn money. You compete in an arena with other other mechs to get money and upgrade your core or cores. You can have a whole hangar full of them. And if you thought the Souls games with their page of stats and stat parameters were complicated, then don't ever play an Armored Core game, because FromSoft's obsession with a stat for everything, I'm pretty sure, really came into play when they were doing the Armored Core series, because there is a number for everything in that game. Everything from energy output and things like that to temperature, heat. Heat is a major component in that game. You have to be careful that your machine, your mech, isn't overheating when you're flying around. Therefore, you have to build and install radiator parts that regulate temperature depending on the type of combat you engage in and everything else. In some of the older Armored Core games, they had a balance stat as well, where each of the different equipable parts on your mech had balance values. So you could basically tune your mech on all of its body parts to be heavier on one side or another, and it affected the way your machine handled. And I was never super hardcore in the Armored Core community, but just talking to people that were really into the game, the amount of level of detail and craziness people would get with their builds was pretty impressive. I liked the game just because it offered a lot of customization and a lot of opportunities to basically play the game however you want. But that game was definitely complicated and not very beginner friendly. Seems like they've mostly had the Armored Core series on ice with the popularity of the Souls type games, but hopefully they bring Armored Core back. The last one I played was Armored Core 4 Answer, I think. I don't think I played the 5th one. Might have played 5, but not Verdict Day. FromSoft like to do expansions too, and I could never really keep up as other games took priority. But the mecha designs are really cool in Armored Core. I think that influenced a lot of the stuff that we see here. Another one I mentioned briefly would be Zone of the Enders, which, interestingly enough, I never played the PS2 Zone of the Enders games. I know they are frequently released in collections. I think there's a remastered edition that's out now. Something I might get back to eventually and try, since especially the Super Best Friends guy spoke very highly of the Armored Core series. I wouldn't mind giving it a try. But the game I did play, which I may or may not have mentioned on videos before, was Zone of the Enders Fist of Mars on the Game Boy Advance, for taking a trip to the past as far as gaming goes and handheld. That game, as far as I know, is a bit of an underground game. It was released everywhere, but I have yet to meet someone else who played it on the Advance back in the day. But the Fist of Mars took place in the Zone of the Enders main universe, but instead of being an action mech combat type game akin to Armored Core but a bit more action focused like the other Zone of the Enders games were, Fist of Mars was more like a turn-based strategy game. I'd say it was similar to Advance Wars in that you have a party of units, you progress on a board, and you have objectives to fulfill, and you fight enemies using a turn-based stat system. Or they had this kind of real-time mechanic where you basically have the enemy flying around in the sighting reticle, and you're trying to lock him in, and then if you're successful, your units do more damage when they actually attack in the turn-based system. But it was really kind of a unique take on that type of strategy game, and it had a pretty involved narrative and a bunch of characters and different endings and a lot of customization. I really liked Fist of Mars. I've played through it many times. My advance has been shelved for a while, but I definitely recommend it, and the mech designs in that game are pretty cool as well. If I can get a good emulator working, I would like to play Fist of Mars for the channel. There are actually a lot of advanced games I'd like to play through, and that would probably be one of the first ones I do. It's pretty good, and if you can get your hands on it, I would recommend giving it a try. Maybe at some point Nintendo will do like a virtual console release for advanced games. I would definitely be on board for something like that. There were tons of gems on the Game Boy Advance that I logged a lot of hours into back in the day. In fact, talking about the Advance, the very first Shin Megami Tensei game I ever played was on Game Boy Advance. It might have been the first localized one to come out in the West, at least that I'd ever heard of, and that was Demi Kids, which I may have talked about. I'm not really good at remembering what I talk about on my channel, but Demi Kids was kind of like a Pokemon-ish, more of a younger audience SMT game, but it had all of the demon collecting and summoning and customization and fusion stuff that the SMT and subsequent Persona games have become known for, and it was a pretty good time. I spent a lot of hours on Demi Kids as well. I think it's called Devil Children in Japan, and changed for obvious reasons when it was brought over to the West. That's another one that I'd like to play for the channel. Potentially a really lengthy Let's Play, because I remember that game taking a while to beat. But if I had to pick two to start off with on the channel from the advanced era, it would probably be Zone of the Enders, Fist of Mars, and then Demi Kids. Looks like I mistakenly colored a bunch of stuff on the line layer for the right leg. Which, that's not good. I might have done the whole, let's see, almost the whole leg. That's one of the challenges of working with different layers. I think that's it. Just those sections. I'll just have to refill them in here. It's important to keep the layer order consistent so that when you're doing things like adding shading, it doesn't screw up your layer hierarchy. If I was working in Paint, I wouldn't have that problem, but my job would also be 50 times harder when it comes to doing things like shading. Going back to the discussion about mecha type games, the Gundam series was I watched more of the Gundam series anime. Oh, I forgot the left leg. There were some games that I played later that probably would have influenced the whole mecha design as well. And one of them was the Gundam Musou game. I can't remember what it was called because I played the first one. The Musou games are made by Tecmo Koei, like the Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors games, which I have played a lot of the Samurai Warriors and Warriors Orochi series, but I can't remember which Gundam one I played or what the name was. I know it was the first one in the series, and I think since then they've probably come out with a few. I sort of tapered off from the Warriors franchise just because I don't have a lot of time to play on console, and those games generally run better on console. I did play the Warriors Orochi recent one and Hyrule Warriors on Switch, and that game was fine. It ran fine. The Gundam ones kind of lost touch with that series. I do remember it being decently popular though. Alright, let's take a look at what we've got here. I think we are just about done with the shading. I'm double checking to make sure there aren't any spots that need to be fixed on the left arm, because what I'm going to do now is show how I use the mirroring to get the right arm in place. Fortunately, it's just a matter of duplicating the folder, renaming it, and then flipping it. By duplicating the entire folder directory all at once, then that allows us to just copy everything over. And then we just flip horizontally. And then move it into place. I think this one will look better with the arm above the shoulder layer here. Let's see, I'm just trying to get the positioning right here. You can move it in a little bit. I'm also trying to be wary of where it intersects down here with the leg. We'll zoom out and see how that looks. I think that's fine. Go ahead and save. Let's see. I think this section on the right leg. Yeah. I can see it clipping through because there's part of the color assignment I need to fix because of the parts I had to recolor. And that's why it was looking strange there. If we go up here and then just fill down these open sections and then add in the shadow highlights, that should fix the problem. Yep, that was a lot better. Alright, what we can do is collapse the folder. And now we have our finished mecha design. Yeah. And I think overall the results turned out pretty well. I'm just taking a look at the shading sections. Some of the shadowing just needs to be cleaned up a little. On the right leg there. But overall, I think that'll do. Looking at the clock, it's been almost an hour and a half in the footage for this particular session. What I think I'll do is I'm kind of on a bit of a schedule for how much time I've got to record. I think what I will do is I will cut this session off here, and then I'll pick up with a new recording session a little bit later, and then I'll spend some time working on the customization part. Maybe instead of just doing one, I'll do 2 different customized models and talk through that whole process. And in that time, I'll think about some other podcast type topics while I'm doing the busy work. And then that might be a better way to break up these videos, because if I do the customization video now, I'm going to be recording for another probably hour potentially, and I don't have the time to do that right now. So what we'll do is we will call this a session here, and then we will pick up next time for the modular core customization portion.